Tonight, we have in conversation Larry Coe and Dr. Nicole Fleetwood, moderated by Elisa Jackson. Uh, this conversation is in union with our Whatever There Is Light exhibition, organized by TILT and also the Center for Black Visual Culture and supported by the Mellon Foundation. Our moderator is Lisa Jackson, a writer and curator, and also a doctoral candidate in SCA here in NYU, curator, Aspen Art Museum, fantastic, a graduate researcher with Marking Time, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration, and the project manager for Wherever There Is Light. Thank you.
I'm especially grateful to be here with two people who I've had the privilege of working with and learning from over the past several years. I have been working with Nicole on Marking Time since 2021, where Larry was one of our featured artists, and then with Larry on Wherever There's Light since 2023. And in a number of ways, both of them have profoundly shaped how I think about photography, archives, and the ethical responsibilities of making and exhibiting images within and against systems of incarceration. Wherever There's Light originally began in 2020 when Larry Coe constructed a studio and exhibition space at the Los Angeles Art Gallery, the Canary Test, for 5 photographers with carceral experience to share their stories and craft through traditional studio portraiture. Starting in 2022, Till collaborated with Cook to create a Philadelphia cohort of artists. Till provided the artists with financial support, resources, and space for each artist to explore their visions in collaboration with Cook and curator Melanie Harvey. Each photographer received an honorarium for their work and access to Till's artistic lab, printing services, production support, and gallery space. And the group also received assistance from a project team comprising of Tilt staff, peer mentor artists, community partners, and curatorial experts and advisors. The Philadelphia exhibition opened in September 2024. The exhibition at NYU opened yesterday, and the next iteration will be at Howard University in 2027. Larry W. Cook is an interdisciplinary artist and archivist working across photography, video, and mixed media. Cook received his MFA from George Washington University. He's exhibited his work nationally at the Brooklyn Museum, Baltimore Museum of Art, MoMA PS1, National Portrait Gallery, and internationally at Schönkunsthal Frankfurt in Germany and FD Gallery in Dubai. His work is in the public collections of Museum of Modern Art, Harvard Art Museums, Baltimore Museum of Art, Lightwork, and other institutions. Cook is a recipient of the 2024 Gordon Parks Fellowship, and he is an associate professor at Howard University. Nicole R. Fleetwood is the Paulette Goddard Professor in the Department of Media, Culture, and Communication, NYU Steinhardt, and the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis. A MacArthur Fellow, she is a writer, curator, and art critic interested in Black art and cultural history, aesthetics, photography, and documentary studies, and art and activism. She's the author of Marking Time, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration, winner of the National Book Critics Award in Criticism, the John Hope Franklin Publication Prize of the American Studies Association, the Susan Glasscock Humanities Book Prize for Interdisciplinary Scholarship, and both the Charles Rufus Maury Book Award in Art History and the Frank Jewett Mathler Award in Art Criticism. She is also the curator of the traveling exhibition Marking Time, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration, which debuted at MoMA PS1. The exhibition was listed as one of the most important art moments in 2020 by the New York Times and among the best shows of the year by the New Yorker and Hyperallergen.
So good evening, everyone. Really appreciate you guys coming out and supporting this project. And again, I want to thank Sarah, Melanie, Anissa, and all of the photographers that are part of this project. So I do want to take a moment to acknowledge those photographers. So those from the Philly and LA cohort, can you guys please stand? Thank you, guys. So I decided this morning I wanted to begin with this image here. In 2019 is when I met Nicole at the James A. Porter Colloquium at Howard University. I think Melanie invited me to be on the committee to help out, and Nicole was doing a lecture on Black art in the age of mass incarceration. And at the time, I was kind of doing work similar to themes that she was discussing. But she was coming up with terms or introducing me to terms, carceral aesthetic. And, I was just really glued to her presentation, and it kind of spoke to some of my interests and as it related to my work. So I waited for her to finish because I knew I had to get in front of Nicole. And this is the very moment when I'm sharing my work with her on my phone. I'm not sure who took this picture. So fervently, discussing some of my projects, and she was interested, but she had mentioned that she had just finished the edits for the Marking Time publication. So even though I missed the publication, a few months later, she would invite me to be part of the actual exhibition. So it was an important moment, and experience. So I just wanted to take this moment to thank you for listening, and giving me the opportunity. So again, it's a full circle moment. Again, it's kind of the importance for students to make sure that you guys attend, artist talks and openings, because you never know who you're going to meet and the opportunities that can come from that. So to kind of transition to a little bit about my practice. And it's kind of interesting to try to figure out where to begin, but kind of given the context of the exhibition, I always want to begin with this particular piece, When Dad Comes Home, that I created in 2013. And this particular series, it's really inspired and influenced by the relationships with my uncles who were incarcerated at the time. And, that experience between exchanging letters and images and phone calls kind of really became the foundation for what my practice would kind of evolve into. It was always kind of challenging to talk about this work in public because they're no longer with us. So it is taking on, a deeper meaning in talking about this work. But it was my first time in creating this piece, engaging with vernacular images, and also thinking about found photography, vernacular images, and appropriation as a kind of conceptual strategy in engaging with photography. So my practice would, evolve into a more interdisciplinary approach between, mixed media, photography, video art, installation, and also what I kind of describe as a social art practice. Well, this piece was really important, and this piece was included in the Marking Time exhibition at MoMA PS1. And my uncle, Andre, he passed away shortly after that opening. But he was so thrilled that his work was included, or his images were included in that exhibition. And we had conversations about, how to help and impact those that have been incarcerated and impacted by that. So a lot of ways this exhibition and project is a homage to them and carrying on their legacy.
Hello, folks. Thank you for coming out in this brutally cold weather. I'm not going to lie and act like we're, it's cold. And I want to thank Deb Willis, who introduced us, and who actually introduced me to the Porter Symposium, where you and I met. And not only, I don't know if Deb knows this, it's the first time ever I actually gave an art talk, is when Deb invited me to the Porter Symposium, and it has completely shaped my professional career. Deb has been a friend, a mentor, a relative, not by blood, but by a chosen family, since I met her in 2003. And one of the things that Deb is a very generous person. You were saying when you're at events, meet people. What is also important, though, when you're at events, don't meet people to take. Build relationships that are reciprocal. I find often when people, you and I are still connected because it was relational. It was not extractive. And I think Deb has taught me that. Deb has so many people who will say what I'm saying about her because she knows how to build relationships and how to nurture relationships. And so thank you, Deb. But it's also like the gift that keeps giving, being friends, deeply having friendships that matter. And you realize I met you because of Deb many, many years later, right? And Melanie and I are connected also through, elders in the field who have made space for us to do the work we're doing. Because, if you think about it, 15, 20 years ago, it would have been hard to do this kind of exhibition. When I started the project, Marking Time, it's not that other people weren't doing things around art in prisons. People were doing that. People have always done that work. I always say this project for me is not a new project because the history of our captivity, especially as Black people, is the history of us making art and dreaming freedom. So this is just an iteration of, centuries-long resistance. But I do think we've shifted at a moment where we can talk about the carceral system in very different ways than when I was raised. And having cousins, kind of coming of age with my male cousins in the town I grew up in, the hyper incarceration was definitely of Black boys, and it started very young. And it was the girls were being educated into a certain kind of service that was beholden to the penal institution, meaning that you drove up every weekend to see an incarcerated cousin, brother, lover, father. And many of my female cousins their lives have been completely rearranged around supporting people across generations from a father to a grandson in relationship to the prison system. And I just want to say that I'm really glad to be here. I'm very happy to be in conversation with Larry. I love that Anissa and Larry have been able to connect through, again, like the thing is you connect with people, you build relationships, and you continue to foster those relationships.
I also wanted to mention, just in terms of fostering relationships and Dr. Deb Willis being the origin for so many of the relationships in this room. So these two self-portraits are by two of the Wherever There Is Light artists, Jonathan on the right, who is in the LA cohort, and Jose, who Jose's self-portrait is on the left, who is a part of the Philly cohort. And Jose and I actually first met as classmates in Dr. Deb Willis's, it was a photo history class, my first semester of grad school. So it was just a nice connection, and really amazing that he was able to join this project. Larry, I don't know, would you like to say some more about?
When I was in undergrad, I emailed Deb Willis. She tried to connect about photography, and she said, "Yeah, that's great, but I have a son who's doing some interesting work." And she connected me with her son, Hank Willis Thomas, and so in a lot of ways, it's a full circle moment. Later on, I would meet Hank at the Porter Colloquium as well, and he gave some words of encouragement. So again, being here with Nicole and Deb is in a lot of ways kind of surreal.
So my first question for you both is, how do system-impacted artists rework or refuse the visual logics of surveillance and criminalization through photography?
Was really interested in how vernacular prison photographs and the influence of those images, but how the photographers behind those images were anonymous. So it was an opportunity to allow those photographers to tell their stories. So we did it through self-portraiture. So one of the images, works from that series, is by Jonathan Chi, as you mentioned, who did this self-portrait where he placed his state-issued IDs from incarceration in the background, but then placing himself in the foreground and turning away from the camera. So that gesture is an act of power, or kind of reclaiming power, resisting the institutional framing as it relates to photography. When you think of mugshots and IDs, prison IDs, so it was one of my favorite pieces in terms of the self-portraiture, but also turning away from the camera is also kind of rejecting the carceral gaze. And then you have Jose Diaz, who is using some of the same material, but his strategy and approach is different, through the form of collage. So in this instance, collaging various state-issued IDs from incarceration, but not only incarceration, but student IDs from, his NYU student ID, his high school ID, even his membership ID from a jiu-jitsu club. So, this layering, obscuring his self-portrait through this act of layering, speaks towards the complexities of Jose in kind of challenging the assumptions and stereotypes as it relates to those that have been incarcerated. So in a lot of ways, I think of Tina Camp's and listening to Imagers, this quiet form of agency. And I think a lot of ways, a lot of the work in this exhibition, the artists were kind of elevating that thought.
I love that these words are, distinct, and yet they reference what I see in a lot of photography that comes out of carceral settings, which is using what I call penal matter, like the materials of prison, often the materials that are used to keep people tethered to carceral systems like ID cards, and turning them in the service of self-making. And so as much as, I think what these works also beautifully demonstrate is like, we can all have the simplest of materials available to us and come up with kind of endless iterations of like a kind of an interior narrative that gets represented through photographic practice.
I think this is a nice transition into my next question. So each of you in your own writing and visual practices have really centered archives and family archives in particular. And so my question is, what role do you see archives playing in creating continuity, kinship, or futurity?
I think one of the most amazing things about people understanding that archives are not something that's just stored in government facilities and libraries is the type of kind of creative engagement it offers us to the story we want to tell of ourselves. And I think of when I think about someone who inspires me as a writer and creative myself, and also in terms of working with people from all walks of life, is Audre Lorde, who was very active and intentional about self-definitions and self-making. And I think that we're understanding how archives are not something that, kind of think historically was out of it as belonging to the quote winners of war and oppressors. That, for example, Stephen Fullwood, who is someone we work closely with, is working on an initiative called the Nomadic Archivist Project. And it's like even how to unhoused people can be archivists, right? And people in prison, people with the most limited resources can create an archival practice. And I say that because one reason that I showed up here at 6:05 is because I was literally finishing a 17-minute audio piece that's actually an archive of my utter devotion to my grandmother, who passed away in 2018. And so it's part of a book that I'm currently finishing up, that's going to come out in the fall. But then it was layered with all this music. My grandmother was the music director at her church for 50 years. And so I asked my aunts, my grandmother had 9 girls, and they all sing. And so they started sending me all this footage of them singing. And so it is an archive, and it's going to be in the Venice Biennial this year. So that's what that's Venice, yeah. But I'm just like, for me, it is really like about self-made thing.
It's to add to that, the archive is a site of memory and possibility. And also think of archive in terms of continuity through preservation. And, being able to preserve, images, documents, letters allows for those narratives to move across generations. So you begin to think about, at least for me, I'm always asking, what does it mean for like my uncle's children and grandchildren to, experience, the images that they left behind, the work that I've created from those archives. In terms of understanding, our family history, that dynamic, and it's an important part of our story. And even thinking beyond that, I've done work engaging with archives. Part of this exhibition, the legacy of the Great Migration, and I was going through archives of my paternal lineage, and kind of using the archive and inspiration to kind of navigate and work through father absence. So it's a way to kind of, in some ways, you're able to kind of reframe and reimagine the past as a process or a way of healing and coping, but also reimagining the future as well.
I think
Can I ask you a question? Sure. You're asking all these questions.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
You do interesting work around archives. Can you talk about your work in relationship to this question? 'Cause I'm always telling people, oh, Anissa, you have to know about Anissa's project.
Yeah. So I am a doctoral candidate here in SEA in the American Studies program, and my project focuses on squatting movements in Harlem between the 1960s and the 1980s, and how housing organizers were connecting their activism around housing and against private property to the Black Power movement and to Puerto Rican anti-colonial movements. Yeah, and I guess in terms of archives, it has been really interesting and sometimes difficult project to work on, in that a number of a lot of the materials that I'm using are not located in any centralized archive. A lot of I'm using oral history and testimony to try and incorporate a history that was intentionally not written down. And then it's also been interesting in that a number of organizers who were squatters at that time were part of the New African movement and had Africanized their names. And so, even like within the archives, like there, or within like, I guess, more institutional archives, might be under their, legal government names, whereas a lot of their organizing materials used their chosen names. Yeah, so that has been an exciting project to work on. My next question was, what does photography make possible beyond testimony?
Well, that's a good question. I would start with community. The thing about working with this project, with the cohorts across, from the West Coast to Philly, the camaraderie, the brotherhood, the relationships built from this project has been the most rewarding aspect of it. The work produced have been amazing, but again, just being able to get to know these photographers and fellowship, um, so that sense of community that could be created through photography. Photography has also allowed me, the space to explore and discover and challenge myself in many ways, whether it's ideology or religion. It kind of creates a safe space to fail and step outside of the box. So um, and it's been a foundation for me to explore so many different things. Um, and one of the things I try to share with my students is to think about your practice, whether it's photography or painting, in relationship to another discipline. So it's not only in terms of production, but in research as well. To help kind of strengthen and inform, what it is that you're doing. So, uh, yeah, so many ways to tackle that question. Well, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if I have an answer, but I think how we opened with me seeing that photograph with Larry and um, anchoring, it is this kind of important way that it's something up until, everyone looks on their phone now, but, this kind of hapticality of it that um, I think a lot of people who have been impacted by prisons still have that experience. Like my cousin Alan, when he came out of prison, he had the largest collection of images of our family because over 21 years, everyone had printed out photographs and sent them to him. So he came out, talk about archives and like photographs, and they were all worn photographs because he looked through them, he cataloged them. There is, loaning images to people in prison. He actually took an image out of circulation from prison he was in because some old timer had a photograph of my mom from like 1980. He didn't even know who my mom was, but he's like, somebody gave me this picture of a pretty lady and it reminded me of being at home. And Alan was like, he sent it back home. He took the picture out of circulation, right? So it's just like thinking about all the, just the way that I think there's something very hyper specific about photography and its relationship to our interior lives that I don't experience with other forms of art. And that, we can, and it is partly because of the indexicality of photographs, even though we know that they can be manipulated, that I think that it is and probably one of the art forms that's most that people have like the kind of most psychic attachments to. I mean, I don't know anyone who doesn't have a photograph that means something to them, right? Even if they don't know anything about painting or sculpture, all these other art forms.
Thank you. I think next I have a question specifically for you, Nicole, which is, how does your writing practice intersect with visual culture in shaping new interpretive frameworks?
I don't write to a outline. Don't listen to me, PhD students. I don't write to an outline. It's got me in a lot of trouble, but I get it done. I actually write to images. Yeah, so that if I'm starting a new project, I always start with an image. If I'm stuck, I just take an image and I just start describing that image. I just keep writing and writing and writing until I get unstuck. Everything I see in the image, I just write it down. And so like my writing process is very, very linked to an engagement with looking and describing what I'm looking at. There's like whole sections in this book that I told you is coming out next fall where I'm just like looking at photographs from like my family and I'm just meditating on the image. Whether the image shows up in the book or not is another thing, but my writing is very much connected to my looking at images.
Thank you. I actually think, I mean, maybe no one should listen to me because I haven't finished my dissertation, but I think that is a useful practice for, I mean, for myself when I'm.
It's generative.
Yeah,
Right?
it's generative.
Yeah, you have to find what's generative. I mean, I wrote it out an outline for my dissertation because my advisor, whom I love, he still remains one of the closest people to me. He's like tasking me. He's a Taurus. I'm a Pisces. So I like made this outline. I was like, now what do I do with the outline?
Yeah.
Like I made this like I couldn't use an outline, but I can use them in this. So that's the way I write.
Great, thank you. And now I have a question for Larry, which is, how do you think about refusal in your work, or what is withheld, obscured, or reimagined?
When you think of like vernacular images, especially family visiting rooms, they document presence and time. So my exploration with those materials is trying to move it into something more pictorial through the process of collage. And for me, it's a way of kind of exploring larger themes of freedom and liberty and possibility. One of the kind of ethical challenges that I'm always considering within working with vernacular images is identity. So often one of my strategies is to kind of remove the identity from those particular images. There's always been a challenge in terms of navigating, and I wanted to ask you that question in terms of how do you navigate working with vernacular images and protecting identity and the ethics around that. I remember asking Tina Camp this question when she visited Howard. She plainly put it that it's up to us as an artist to lead the audience and the viewer where we want to take them. So it's really up to us as the responsibility. But there's always a question that's in the back of my mind. And kind of engaging with the archives has allowed me to, going back to the question of continuity, kind of preserve history and memory as it relates to my relatives. Also kind of connect particular themes and motifs within my work as well. But it also has allowed me to build communities. So there's the other side of my practice, engaging with club photography, archives, and kind of serving as an archivist, but working with those photographers and managing their materials and thinking about how we preserve and build community and push it forward.
I just closed an exhibition. Deb wrote an essay for the catalog called Kinship and Community. It is a collection of Black Texas photographers that's from the 1870s onward. Aperture is publishing it in, I think, February or March. But so many of the images were images made inside community by Black photographers who were documenting sororities, local NAACP meetings, a protest that maybe it's just 5 people trying to desegregate a school, right? And that these photographs were circulating within what I call a Black media infrastructure. These are images created by Black people for Black people, and that not necessarily circulated outside of the communities themselves until they became part of these larger archives. And now we can read them not just only locally, but within kind of regional and national movements. Well,
Before we open up to a Q&A from the audience, I was wondering if either or both of you would like to ask a question to each other.
well, what are you working on now? And I'm curious about how your collaborative work has impacted your solo work. And does that also impact your teaching? Because for me, I find like, when I started doing programming around marking time, I started doing the programming 6 years before the book came out. And people are like, you're doing all this service. I was like, no, I'm doing research. The programming is feeding my research, which is feeding my collaboration, which is, it's like it was so layered. So I'm wondering, how are those things kind of playing out for you?
Similarly, when I'm thinking about a project, I'm thinking about the research. I'm also thinking about how to share that research with my students. So a lot of my personal projects become lesson plans, and I'm also thinking about like how to create programs around those particular projects as well. What I'm working on next is a series of landscapes. So I've been photographing landscapes near prisons, specifically the prisons that my two uncles were incarcerated in Pennsylvania and Hagerstown, Maryland. Um, so one of the things I've been really interested in is the kind of romanticism of American landscapes. But when you think of incarceral spaces, oftentimes in the prison yards, they can view the same landscapes through, barbed wire. So it's kind of challenging that sense of romanticism and kind of subverting those ideas. But also thinking about um, landscapes as a metaphor for the challenges of reentry, and kind of getting back into society and that is kind of in a lot of ways it's the arc of what I've been working on for the past 10 years in a lot of ways. Um, Aside from that, I've have some like real personal stuff and working and exploring astrophotography, and I've been on this hump of just producing and thinking about exhibitions and tenure and being on sabbatical last spring. This allowed me to focus on things that I want to explore, aside from showing or exhibiting. So yeah, that's where I kind of been at presently. I have a solo exhibition that opens at the Candela Gallery in Richmond in a few months. And I have a residency at the Visual Studies Workshop in Rochester this summer. So yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's interesting because I've always been kind of thinking about the various threads between my work with like club photography environment and carceral aesthetics. And thing I've always kind of land on is the agency through the pose and how that is a act of power and how it kind of signifies a certain persona and performance. Krista Thompson refers to it as the shine, which allows people to perform and allow their persona to take over. I always thought about even working in the club environment being a space of being able to be free, really. And I share this story all the time. And being a club photographer, taking photos of people in front of club backdrops. Folks would come and take images, and they wouldn't. Sometimes there would be instances where they wouldn't pay for the images. They just want me to come and take their image, and they'll come back. We'll retake it. I want to pose differently. And even in the visiting rooms, even though it's a confined space, it's oftentimes the only way that folks can express themselves to some degree. So it's been something in my practice I've been investigating in terms of the parallels between the two.
Just to acknowledge Akil, who is one of the artists in the project and also a very talented writer who's working on a project that Marking Time is doing right now where we're publishing these artist catalogs for.
I would say a vernacular image is a photograph um, that exists in kind of a daily function. So whether it's family photos, it can be identification images. So kind of classified in that regard.
It's most of the images on your phone
Mm-hmm.
are vernacular. They're usually private consumption or they're meant to circulate among family. They're rarely meant to be exhibited for public view.
Kind of everyday images that people.
That's a great question. And I just want to kind of pull back from that question to say that sometimes having as much access to technology as we have as non-incarcerated people, it makes us less mindful of our power and agency. And I say that because when I teach, I'm not a photographer. I teach photo studies courses, though, and I always say, like, here right now, we are walking around with over 1 million images in this room, which Deb will tell you historically is more than you'll find almost in any art up until like the 90s. Deb has worked as the archivist at the Schoenberg, at the Smithsonian. You couldn't find that many images in one library. And in this room, we have that many images, right? And so we have not, it's like the technology has outpaced our critical thinking around what we're going to do with this technology and these images, because I bet you probably 70% of the images, I know 70% of the images I have on my phone are things that I could do away with because they're just like, 20 shots of my puppy eating food today, or, like just literally, right? So I think that one of the things we all can think about is just like being much more mindful about like, well, why, what are we documenting and why, and how is this a part of an archive that we might want to be able to create? You don't have to be like, like you can be irreverent, have fun, whatever. I'm not saying like everything has to be like some super noble cause, but I just don't think we're making wise, intelligent choices with how we engage with what we have access to now. Like, it's pretty powerful that I could walk with the phone I have, and I was talking about the project I make. I could record. I have a huge family, and I could I could archive all of them on my phone, right? So I just think, again, be more mindful of what you have access to now. Generally in prisons, incarcerated people are not supposed to have access to smartphones. There are ways in which people do get access to through phones. I want to say 99.9% of those ways are through prison staff. So, everyone, and then who gets in trouble are the incarcerated people, but it's prison staff who's bringing those in and making money, selling materials, also selling drugs and all the other things to incarcerated people, right? So there have been, there are, different advocacy groups who are helping to, really bring out documentation of incarcerated people. And there's some really powerful journalism that takes place inside prisons as well. And I think, we all have an ethical responsibility to listen to firsthand accounts, to watch firsthand accounts, no matter how brutal and how hard, and to help support that work. There have been several photo-based programs in prisons, but again, photography and cameras are not something that incarcerated people have readily access to, but there have been programs or collaborations between educators and artists and prisons.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of far and few in between. But I'm thinking about Lorton's Dark Room, where they actually had an active dark room, and inmates could participate and create and manage that space. And there's actually an exhibition in DC based around that work as well. So
I think we're going to begin to wrap up. So I'll hand the mic to Dr. Deb Willis.
Thank you. This is great. And yes, in the 70s, there's a floating photography project here in New York that often had opportunities for incarcerated people to photograph and exhibit their work. It was on the Hudson River, where I remember when I first moved to New York, that was part of a major project. So it is possible to have that in the history of the archive of artists. I'd like to thank everyone, and especially the staff. Can the staff of Tilt and CBBC stand up? Yeah. But especially Kalila, and thank for all of you've done to make this happen. Where's the rest of your staff? They went home. Yeah, but they have been wonderful in terms of supporting this project. And I just like to say thank you and thank our speakers for today. Take care. Thank you.
And for those who haven't had the chance to check out the exhibition, it's on the ground floor of this building. And we have catalogs for sale right over here. So thank you, everyone.